Before we dive into the shadowy streets of 1978 Vienna and the dinner table where the Cold War briefly held its breath, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. These stories from the archives are only possible because of your support, and we have many more declassified files to open together. Now, let's go back to November of 1978. The rain in Vienna does not wash the city clean. It merely makes the cobblestones slick and turns the gray facades of the imperial buildings into imposing dark cliffs. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of November night that seeps through the layers of a wool coat and settles directly into the bones. Elias Thorn stood under the awning of a tobacco shop on the Kärntner Strasse, pretending to examine a display of meerschaum pipes. He didn't smoke, but in his line of work, loitering was an art form that required props. Thorn was officially listed as a cultural attaché for the United States Department of State. His bio, carefully curated and filed in the drawers of every intelligence agency in the Eastern Bloc, said he was from Connecticut, educated at Yale, and had a passion for Austrian opera. All of that was true. What the bio didn't say, but what everyone who mattered suspected, was that Thorn was the station chief for the CIA's Vienna operations. He was the man who kept the secrets in a city that traded in them like currency. At 6:15 p.m., a man in a green Loden coat walked past him. He didn't stop, didn't look at Thorn, didn't break his stride. But as he passed, the man dropped a folded newspaper onto the small ledge of the shop window, right next to where Thorn's hand was resting. It was a copy of Die Presse, already damp from the rain. The man disappeared into the crowd of umbrellas and trench coats, just another ghost in a city full of them. Thorn waited 30 seconds. He checked his reflection in the glass, looking not at his own face but at the street behind him. A young couple arguing near the tram stop, an old woman walking a dachshund. No one static, no one watching. He picked up the newspaper. He didn't open it until he was back in the safety of his apartment in the 1st District. The apartment was swept for bugs twice a week, but Thorn still turned on the radio, a broadcast of Mahler's Fifth Symphony, before unfolding the paper. Inside, tucked between the sports scores and the weather report, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. There was no stamp, no return address. Just his name, Elias, written in a precise, angular hand that he recognized immediately. He sliced the envelope open. Inside was a single card, embossed with the logo of Zu den Drei Husaren, one of the finest and most expensive restaurants in Vienna. The handwritten note was brief. "The game is becoming tedious, Elias. Let us discuss the end game. Tonight. 8 p.m. Come alone or don't come at all. V." Thorn stared at the initial. V. Viktor Volkov. Colonel Viktor Volkov of the KGB. The resident of Soviet intelligence in Austria. For 3 years, Thorn and Volkov had been circling each other like two sharks in a very small tank. They had poached each other's assets, disrupted each other's drops, and engaged in a silent war of attrition that had left 3 people in prison and 1 career diplomat quietly retired. But they had never met. Not officially. They had seen each other across crowded diplomatic receptions, exchanged polite nods at the opera, but they had never spoken directly. This was a breach of protocol so severe it bordered on madness. Intelligence officers of their rank did not meet for dinner. They did not break bread. They communicated through proxies, through back channels, through the brutal language of espionage. For Volkov to issue a direct invitation meant one of 2 things. Either he was defecting, or he was about to deliver a kill shot that didn't require a gun. Thorn went to his small safe behind a reproduction of a Klimt landscape. He took out his Browning high power, checked the magazine, and then put it back. Volkov had said, "The 3 Hussars." It was a public place, high profile. A gun would be useless there. If Volkov wanted him dead, he would have been run over by a car on the Ringstrasse weeks ago. This was something else. This was theater. Thorn dressed slowly. He chose a navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a dark tie. He wanted to look like exactly what he was, a boring mid-level American bureaucrat. He needed to be the canvas upon which Volkov would try to paint his masterpiece. As he tied his shoes, Thorn felt a cold knot of anticipation in his stomach. In the intelligence world, there is an old saying, "If you don't know who the mark is at the table, it's you." Thorn checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. He grabbed his umbrella and headed out into the rain. He had a dinner reservation with the devil. Vienna in 1978 was a city of distinct layers. On the surface, it was pastry shops, waltzes, and the lingering glory of the Habsburg Empire. But underneath, it was the friction point of the Cold War. It was situated deep in Central Europe, a neutral island surrounded by the Iron Curtain. It was the only place where NATO and the Warsaw Pact rubbed shoulders every single day. As Thorn walked toward the Weibergasse, he ran through his mental catalog of Volkov. Viktor Volkov was 52 years old, a veteran of the Great Patriotic War. Though he had been young then, he had made his name in Berlin in the 50s, ruthless in his suppression of dissent, brilliant in his recruitment of West German politicians. He was known for his taste in Western luxuries, whiskey, tailored suits, fast cars, and his absolute, terrifying loyalty to the state. He was not an ideologue who shouted slogans. He was a pragmatist who believed that the Soviet Union was an empire that required order, and he was the keeper of that order. Thorn arrived at Zu den Drei Husaren at 7:55 p.m. The restaurant was an institution, a place of heavy velvet curtains, dark wood, and the soft clinking of silver against fine china. The air smelled of roasted duck, expensive perfume, and old money. The maître d', a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble, bowed slightly as Thorn entered. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I believe I'm expected," Thorn said, his German flawless, tinged with a slight Viennese lilt he had perfected over the years. "The name is Volkov." The maître d's eyes flickered, just a fraction of a second, but Thorn saw it. Fear, respect, perhaps a mixture of both. "Of course, Herr Thorn. Please, right this way." They didn't ask for his name. Volkov had already briefed the staff. That was the first power move. "I control the environment before you even step into it." Thorn was led through the main dining room, past tables occupied by Austrian politicians, visiting dignitaries, and wealthy industrialists. The restaurant was a sea of murmuring voices and discreet laughter. The maître d' led him to a secluded corner table, shielded from the rest of the room by a large potted palm and a heavy velvet partition. It was the best table in the house for privacy, the worst for security. There was no clear line of sight to the exit. Sitting there, reading a leather-bound menu, was Viktor Volkov. He looked exactly like his surveillance photos, only sharper. The grain of the black and white telephoto lenses didn't capture the piercing blue of his eyes or the immaculate cut of his charcoal suit. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He didn't look up as Thorn approached. He waited until Thorn was standing directly beside the table. Then, slowly, deliberately, Volkov closed the menu and looked up. He didn't smile. "Elias," Volkov said. His voice was a deep baritone, his English accented but precise, learned not in a classroom but in the field. "You are punctual. I admire that in an adversary." "Victor," Thorn replied, keeping his face neutral. He pulled out the chair opposite the Russian and sat down. "You have expensive taste for a servant of the proletariat." Volkov chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "And you, Elias, look remarkably calm for a man who is walking into a minefield. Please sit." I took the liberty of ordering wine, a 1971 Bordeaux. Decadent, I know, but the Austrians do have excellent cellars. A waiter materialized instantly, pouring a dark, rich red liquid into Thorn's glass. Thorn didn't touch it. He watched Volkov. "Why are we here, Victor?" Thorn asked, cutting through the pleasantries. "If you wanted to defect, there are standard channels. You didn't need to rent out the Drei Husaren." Volkov picked up his glass, swirled the wine, and inhaled the bouquet. "Defect? You Americans. You always think everyone wants to buy blue jeans and listen to rock and roll. No, Elias, I am not here to defect. I am here to do you a favor." "A favor?" "I am here to save your life," Volkov said, taking a sip. "Or, more accurately, to offer you a choice about how your life ends. Politically speaking, of course." Thorn leaned back in his chair. The game had begun. He scrutinized the Russian across from him. Volkov was radiating confidence. It wasn't the bluster of a man bluffing. It was the relaxed posture of a man holding 4 aces. Thorn felt a prickle of unease on the back of his neck. I'm listening, Thorn said. Good. Volkov smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. It was cold, predatory. But first, let us order. The hors d'oeuvres here are magnificent. I recommend the goose liver. It is excessively rich. The waiter returned, taking their orders with the hushed reverence of a priest receiving confession. Volkov ordered the goose liver and the roast duck. Thorn ordered a simple consommé and the boiled beef. He wanted to keep his stomach light. Adrenaline was already pumping through his system, diverting blood away from digestion. For the first 20 minutes, Volkov refused to talk business. He spoke of the opera. He had seen Tosca the previous week and found the tenor lacking. He spoke of the weather, complaining about the dampness aggravating an old injury from the war. He spoke about his daughter, who was studying physics at Moscow State University. It was a classic interrogation technique, flipped on its head, normalizing the environment, making the abnormal, a KGB colonel and a CIA station chief dining together, seem mundane. It was designed to lower Thorn's defenses, to lull him into a false sense of camaraderie. We are just two professionals, the subtext said. We are the only two men in this city who truly understand the burden of command. Thorn didn't take the bait. He answered politely, but briefly. He kept his eyes moving, scanning the room, watching the waiter's hands, watching Volkov's hands. You are tense, Elias, Volkov observed as the appetizers arrived. He spread a generous amount of pâté onto a piece of toast. You are wondering if I have poisoned the wine, or if there is a microphone in the flower arrangement. The thought crossed my mind, Thorn admitted. Paranoia is a professional hazard. Volkov nodded. But unnecessary tonight. I want you clear-headed. I want you to understand exactly what is happening. Tell me, how is Project Skylark proceeding? Thorn froze. His hand, halfway to his water glass, stopped for a microsecond before continuing. It was an imperceptible hesitation to anyone else, but to Volkov, it must have looked like a flinch. Project Skylark. It was one of the most highly classified operations in the European theater. A tap on a hardline communication cable running beneath the streets of East Berlin. Only 5 people in Vienna knew the code name. I don't know what you're talking about, Thorn said calmly. Volkov laughed. Of course not, just as you don't know about the safe house on Taberstrasse. Just as you don't know that your courier, the young man with the bad acne, stops to play pinball at the Prater before delivering your distinctively marked diplomatic pouches. Volkov leaned forward, his elbows on the table, invading Thorn's space. The pleasant veneer was cracking, revealing the steel underneath. I know everything, Elias. I know about the budget overruns. I know about the pressure from Langley. I know that you are up for a promotion to Deputy Director of Operations if you keep Vienna quiet for another 6 months. And I know that you are failing. Thorn took a sip of water. He needed to buy time. Volkov was throwing jabs, testing his range. Knowing the name Skylark was bad, but it wasn't fatal. Names could be leaked. It didn't mean the operation was compromised. You read good fiction, Victor, Thorn said dismissively. But if you invited me here to recite rumors you bought from some desperate freelancer, I'm afraid you're wasting your budget. Rumors, Volkov mused. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. Let us move past rumors. Let us talk about the Weaver. The air left the room. If Skylark was a secret, the Weaver was a ghost. The Weaver was the CIA's most valuable asset in the Kremlin. A source deep within the Soviet Ministry of Defense who had been providing high-grade intelligence on missile deployments for 2 years. Thorn had built his entire reputation on the intelligence product coming from the Weaver. The identity of the source was known only to Thorn and the director of the CIA. I see I have your attention now, Volkov said softly. I have no idea who or what that is, Thorn lied, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. Don't insult me, Elias, Volkov snapped. We found him, 3 days ago. A deputy minister in logistics, a greedy little man with a fondness for French cognac and American dollars. We found the camera. We found the one-time pads. We found the instructions written in your handwriting. Thorn stared at the colonel. This was the disaster scenario. If the Weaver had been caught, the damage was catastrophic. But why was Volkov telling him? Why not just execute the spy and feed disinformation back to the CIA? Why show his hand at dinner? If you caught a spy, Victor, you would be celebrating in Moscow, not dining in Vienna, Thorne said, probing for the weakness in the story. Oh, he is being processed, Volkov said with a grim smile. He will sing. They always do. But that is not why I am here. I am here because the Weaver is just the beginning. Through him, we have identified the entire chain. We know the courier. We know the cutouts. And most importantly, we have the records of the payments. Volkov reached into his inner jacket pocket. Thorne's muscles tensed, ready to move. But Volkov simply produced a small photograph and slid it across the white tablecloth, face down. "Turn it over," Volkov commanded. Thorne hesitated, then flipped the photo. It was a grainy black and white image. It showed Thorne standing on a street corner in Zurich 2 years ago. He was handing a briefcase to a man. The man was the deputy minister, the Weaver. It was impossible. Thorne had been meticulous. The meeting in Zurich was supposed to be a black meeting. No records, no surveillance, totally off the books. "We have the negative," Volkov said. "We have the bank transfer records to the Swiss account. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Copies of this photograph, along with a dossier detailing your personal involvement in an illegal, unsanctioned operation that violates Austrian neutrality, will be delivered to the Austrian Chancellor, the New York Times, and the desk of your director at Langley." Thorne looked at the photo. It was a career ender, not just for him. It would cause a diplomatic incident that would freeze U.S.-Austrian relations for a decade. It would humiliate the agency. It would destroy Thorne's life. "Why?" Thorne asked. His voice was steady, but he felt the ground crumbling beneath him. "Because I want you to leave," Volkov said. "I want you to resign, tonight. I want you to board a plane for Washington tomorrow and never set foot in Europe again. You are a nuisance, Elias. You are too effective. I want you off the board." The main course arrived. Roast duck for Volkov with red cabbage and dumplings. Boiled beef for Thorne. The smell of the food was suddenly nauseating. Volkov began to eat with gusto, cutting the meat with surgical precision. "It is a generous offer, Elias. You retire. You keep your pension. You go teach at a university. You write memoirs that no one reads. You live. And if I refuse? Then I release the dossier," Volkov said between bites. "You will be recalled in disgrace. You will be investigated for incompetence. The Austrians will likely declare you persona non grata before you can even pack your bags. Your name will be mud. And your precious Skylark, your Weaver, every operation you have touched, they will all be burned." Thorne looked at the boiled beef. He picked up his fork. He needed to think. The photo was real. The threat was real. Volkov had him in a checkmate, but something was wrong. Thorne had been in the game for 20 years. He knew the rhythm of a takedown. If the KGB had this kind of leverage, they wouldn't use it to force a resignation. They would turn him. They would blackmail him into becoming a double agent. "Sign this confession, Elias, and you can keep your job, but now you work for us." That was the standard play. To force a resignation was wasteful. It was personal. It was emotional. Why did Volkov want him gone so badly? And why now? "You're offering me a graceful exit," Thorne said slowly. "That's very un-Russian of you, Victor." "I am feeling sentimental," Volkov shrugged. "We are old warriors, you and I. I have no desire to see you rot in a federal prison for mishandling funds." "Mishandling funds?" Thorne asked. "The payments to the Weaver," Volkov said. $200,000. Did it all go to the agent, Elias? Or did some of it find its way into a private account in the Cayman Islands? That is what the dossier suggests." "That's a lie," Thorne said. "It is a documented lie," Volkov corrected. "We have forged the paper trail beautifully. Even your own people won't be able to tell the difference. You will be painted not just as incompetent, but as corrupt. A thief." The waiter poured more wine. Thorne watched the red liquid swirl in the glass. He wasn't drinking, but he needed the glass as a prop. He lifted it, inhaling the aroma. Volkov was overplaying his hand. The corruption angle was too much. It was the garnish that ruined the dish. Volkov was desperate. He needed Thorne gone immediately. Why? Thorne's mind raced back through the last few months. The intercepts, the troop movements, the quiet rumblings from Moscow. There had been rumors of a purge in the KGB, internal struggles, a faction loyal to Brezhnev versus a faction loyal to Andropov. Volkov was an Andropov man. Everyone knew that. But if the Brezhnev faction was gaining ground, Thorne looked at the photo again. Zurich. 2 years ago. Who had taken the photo? If Volkov had the photo for 2 years, why use it now? Why wait until the Weaver was caught? Unless the Weaver wasn't caught. Unless Volkov was bluffing about the capture to give weight to the photo. Thorne took a small bite of the beef. It was tasteless to him, like chewing cardboard, but the act of eating settled him. It was a normal action in an insane situation. The Weaver is a tough old bird, Thorne said conversationally. I'm surprised he cracked so quickly. Did you pull his fingernails out? We have more sophisticated methods these days, Volkov said. Chemicals, sleep deprivation. The truth comes out eventually. And he gave you the bank codes? Everything, Volkov said. Interesting, Thorne said. Because the Weaver didn't know the bank codes. We used a blind drop system for the payments. He never saw the account numbers. Volkov didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He found them. Spies are resourceful. It was a small slip, a tiny crack in the porcelain. The Weaver was a logistical genius, but he was tech illiterate. He wouldn't know how to find a Swiss bank account number hidden in a complex laundering scheme. Volkov was lying about the details, which meant he might be lying about the whole thing. But the photo was real. The threat of exposure was real. Even if the Weaver was safe, the photo proved Thorne had met with a Soviet official. That alone was damaging. Thorne needed to turn the table. He needed a weapon. He looked at Volkov eating his duck, confident, arrogant. The colonel thought he had won. He was already celebrating. Thorne reached into his pocket. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have a dossier. He had his wallet, a pen, a handkerchief, and a small folded piece of paper he had received that morning from a source in the Austrian Ministry of Interior, a mundane report about visa applications. It was useless. Or was it? In the world of intelligence, truth is irrelevant. Perception is everything. Volkov was trying to create a perception of Thorne's guilt. Thorne needed to create a perception of something much worse for Volkov. Thorne remembered a piece of intel from 6 months ago. A rumor that Volkov's son-in-law had been arrested in Leningrad for black market currency trading. The incident had been hushed up. Volkov had used his influence to make it disappear. It was a weak lever, but it was the only one he had. No, that wasn't enough. Volkov would laugh at that. Thorne needed something existential. He looked at the colonel. You seem in a hurry, Victor. Why tomorrow? Why not give me a week to pack? The political climate is shifting, Volkov said vaguely. Ideally, I want this wrapped up before the weekend. Before the Politburo meeting on Friday? Thorne guessed. Volkov's knife screeched slightly against the plate, a tiny sound. But it was there. Thorne smiled. He had found the nerve. The Politburo meeting, Thorne repeated, his voice gaining strength. The one where they are discussing the budget for the new directorates. The one where they are reviewing the performance of the foreign residencies. Volkov stopped eating. He placed his knife and fork down. You are informed, Elias. But that does not change your situation. The photo is the reality. Your career is dead. My career is a detail, Thorne said. Let's talk about yours. Thorne leaned forward. You need a scalp. You need a big win to show Moscow. You're under pressure, Victor. The center is asking questions. Why haven't you cracked the Vienna station? Why are the Americans operating with impunity? You need to show them you are still the alpha dog. I am showing them. Volkov pointed at the photo. I am destroying the station chief. But you're not destroying me, Thorne said softly. You're asking me to quit. If you destroy me publicly, there will be an inquiry, a massive investigation. And in that investigation, things might come out. Things you don't want Moscow to know. I have nothing to hide, Volkov sneered. Don't you? Thorne asked. He was improvising now, skating on thin ice over a black abyss. What about the meeting in Salzburg last month? The one with the Israeli delegation? It was a total fabrication. Thorne had no idea if Volkov had been to Salzburg. But every KGB officer had unauthorized meetings. It was how they survived. Volkov's eyes narrowed. I was not in Salzburg. That's not what the Mossad thinks. Thorn lied smoothly. They have recordings, Victor, of a man offering to trade influence for safe passage. Volkov laughed, but it was forced. You are desperate, Elias. You are inventing ghosts. Am I? Thorn reached for his wine glass again. You see, Victor, you came here to threaten me with a photo of me doing my job. Yes, it's embarrassing. Yes, it might get me fired, but that's all it is. A job. Thorn paused. But if I release what I have, you don't lose your job. You lose your life. You know how the center treats traitors. A bullet in the back of the neck in the basement of the Lubyanka. Volkov stared at him. The confidence was still there, but the edges were fraying. The seed of doubt had been planted. In the Soviet system, accusation was as good as guilt. If the Americans claimed Volkov was turning, Moscow wouldn't investigate to find the truth. They would investigate to purge the risk. You have nothing, Volkov said. You are bluffing. The difference between a bluff and a trap is who walks away. Thorn said. You showed me your card, Victor. Now I'm going to show you the deck. Thorn signaled the waiter. Coffee, please, and the check. We are not finished, Volkov hissed. I am, Thorn said. But before I go, I'm going to give you something. A gift. Thorn reached into his jacket pocket again. He pulled out a pen and a cocktail napkin. He wrote a series of numbers on the napkin. Random numbers. A date. A time. A flight number. And a Swiss bank account number. The same one Volkov had mentioned earlier. He slid the napkin across the table. What is this? Volkov asked, looking at the scribbles. That, Thorn said, his voice dropping to a whisper, is the account number you mentioned. The one you said the Weaver used. But here's the funny thing, Victor. That's not the Weaver's account. That's your account. Volkov stared at the napkin. This is nonsense. Is it? Thorn leaned in. That account was opened 3 years ago. In your name. Or rather, in the name of the shell company you used to buy that dacha in the Crimea. We've been depositing money into it for 6 months. It was a lie. A beautiful, complex, terrifying lie. Thorn had no idea if Volkov had a dacha. But every Soviet official was corrupt. Every one of them skimmed off the top. You are lying, Volkov said, but his voice lacked the thunder it had earlier. Check the ledger, Thorn said. Or better yet, don't. Because tomorrow morning, when I send my resignation letter, I'm also sending a cable to our contact in the KGB's Internal Affairs Directorate. I'm going to tell them that the reason I'm resigning is that you, my greatest asset, have been compromised, and I need to protect you. Thorn sat back. The genius of the move was not in the evidence because there was no evidence. The genius was in the narrative. I am going to claim you as my spy, Victor, Thorn said, watching the color drain from the colonel's face. I'm going to tell the world that for 3 years you have been working for me, that the great Viktor Volkov is the highest-ranking CIA mole in history, and I'm resigning to draw attention away from you. Volkov sat frozen. He understood the implications instantly. If Thorn resigned and claimed it was to protect Volkov, Moscow would panic. They wouldn't believe Volkov's denials. The coincidence was too perfect. The photo of Thorn in Zurich? Moscow would view it as proof that Volkov was meeting his handler, not catching a spy. Thorn had taken Volkov's weapon, the photo, and turned it into a noose around the Russian's neck. The restaurant was still buzzing with polite conversation, but at the corner table, the silence was deafening. The waiter arrived with the coffee, placing the delicate porcelain cups on the table. He looked from one man to the other, sensed the tension, and retreated quickly. Volkov looked at the napkin. He looked at the numbers. They meant nothing, and yet they meant everything. You would burn yourself to burn me? Volkov asked quietly. I'm already burned, remember? Thorn smiled. You said so yourself. My career is over. I have nothing to lose. But you have everything to lose. The dacha, the daughter in Moscow, the prestige. Thorn took a sip of the coffee. It was hot, bitter, and perfect. So here is the new deal, Thorn said. I don't resign. I don't leave Vienna. The photo stays in your pocket. You go back to your embassy and you report that your source was wrong, that the photo was a case of mistaken identity. You bury it. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning the narrative changes, Thorne said. I won't be the incompetent station chief. I'll be the handler who successfully turned the KGB resident of Vienna. I'll be a hero, and you'll be a memory. Volkov stared into his coffee cup. His mind was calculating the odds. He was a master of chess, but Thorne was playing poker. And in poker, it doesn't matter what cards you have. It matters what the other guy thinks you have. Volkov knew that the KGB was paranoid. He knew that Internal Affairs was looking for a scapegoat. If Thorne threw this accusation out, it would stick. Even if it wasn't true, the investigation alone would destroy Volkov. He would be recalled. He would be interrogated. And in the cellars of the Lubyanka, everyone is guilty of something. The colonel looked up. His eyes were tired. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary calculation. You are a bastard, Elias, Volkov said. There was no venom in it, just a factual observation. I learned from the best, Thorne replied. Volkov reached out and took the napkin. He crumpled it in his large hand. He didn't tear it up. He just squeezed it tight, as if trying to crush the threat contained within the ink. The photo, Volkov began. Burn it, Thorne said. Volkov nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph. He held it for a moment, looking at the image of Thorne in Zurich. Then he picked up the candle that was burning in the center of the table. He held the corner of the photograph to the flame. The paper curled and blackened. The image of the illicit meeting bubbled and vanished. Volkov dropped the burning remnant into the ashtray and watched it turn to ash. The goose liver was excellent, Volkov said, his voice flat. But I have lost my appetite for the duck. A pity, Thorne said. I hear the chef is sensitive. Volkov signaled for the check. This dinner, it never happened. What dinner? Thorne asked innocently. Volkov paid the bill with a stack of Austrian shillings. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at Thorne, regaining a shred of his dignity. One day, Elias, you will make a mistake, a real one, and I will be there. I look forward to it, Victor, Thorne said, remaining seated. Volkov turned and walked away. He moved stiffly, his shoulders hunched slightly, like a man carrying a heavy weight. He didn't look back. Thorne waited until he was sure the colonel had left the building. Then he let out a long, slow breath. His hands were trembling beneath the table. He clasped them together to stop the shaking. It had been the biggest bluff of his life. There was no Swiss account for Volkov. There was no record of payments. If Volkov had called his bluff, if he had walked out and released the dossier, Thorne would have been finished. But Thorne had understood the one fundamental truth of the Soviet system. Fear is the only currency that matters. Volkov feared his own masters more than he hated his enemy. Thorne finished his coffee. He stood up, put on his coat, and walked out into the rainy Vienna night. The air tasted sweet. He was alive. He was still the station chief. And for tonight at least, the Cold War had been won with a cocktail napkin and a lie.